Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Live from Toronto, this is IFA's Global Café. My name is Bruna Suertes. I'm Director of Communications at International Federation of Aging, and it is my pleasure to host today's session. The session is being recorded. It's also being live streamed through our Facebook channel. And if you have any comments or questions, please make sure to use the chat function along the bottom of your screen. Today we have an amazing discussion that is back, and thank you all for sending your messages to request for the session to be scheduled again. So we have Mr. Colum Lowe on this AG thing. Our feature starts today, and I'll hand it over now to our moderator, Dr. Jane Barrett. Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bruna, and welcome one and all. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Design is a powerful tool for translating people's needs into tangible products and services. The Design Age Institute, funded in the midst of the pandemic in 2020 by Research England, appears well placed to use design-led innovation to bridge the gap between people's needs as they age and the development of desirable and commercially viable products and services that increase demand and that word enable happier aging. Today, as Bruna said, we're in conversation with Colum Lowe, and Colum is a senior design leader with a significant track record of developing inclusive products and services in the private, public, and charitable sectors. It's really curious to look at people's backgrounds and professions. So Colum has been head of design at a range of organisations, including the NHS, Sainsbury's, and the Ministry of Justice, and has worked closely throughout his career with marginalised user groups. His experience includes running the design firms Being, Crabtree Hall, and Calder Mall, and founding the independent safeguarding service CIC. So welcome, Colin, to this Global Cafe and being in conversation with you. So first and foremost, Colin, how did you land to be the director of the Design Aging Institute in such a tumultuous global time? Was it a win for you, or was it a loss for you?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jane, for inviting me to talk. It's always a pleasure to sit here and not have to give a presentation, just to sit here and chat. So, so thanks for the invite. Well, how I ended up at the Design Age Institute, I guess it was a very, very circuitous route. I graduated as a product designer, and as a young designer, took part in a product design competition, a challenge set by the Royal College of Art, looking at design and aging, what was then not quite known yet as inclusive design, but what was to become inclusive design. And I was lucky enough to be one of the finalists and have my work exhibited at the Design Museum. And ever since then, it has been clear to me that design could and perhaps should be used not just for commercial benefit and choosing the next color of a chocolate wrapper, but should actually be used for societal good. And I slowly kind of morphed my career into working for Design for Social Good from then. And I've had a long relationship with the Royal College and the Helen Hamlin Centre. Mainly working actually in healthcare and in autism, design for adult autism. But when this role came up, I was desperate to take it on and focus on design and healthy aging.
You know, the words design for social good pop out to me because in your career, you've worked across sectors and across disciplines, which, you know, the IFA finds absolutely essential. So how could you, what could inform your work at the ministry that you did in Sainsbury's or the NHS, or how did that, how did you connect the dots to really inform the ministry?
I don't think it matters in terms of the design process and the purposes of design. I don't think it matters whether it's private sector or public sector, whether it's service design or product design. It is all about understanding people and trying to, manage their expectations of a brand or of a service or of a process. So it is, understanding why people do things. And that can be quite a negative thing, as in, if you go into a supermarket and there's a suspiciously beautiful smell of bread at certain times of the day, it is highly unlikely it's because they're baking bread. It's about pumping, senses out there to encourage you to think about buying bread, or sawdust, or anything else. The smell of freshly cut pine in the wood department of a home base or a DIY store is more likely to get you thinking about buying wood and purchasing wood. So it can be quite manipulative in the private sector, encouraging people to buy more than they were expecting through impulse purchases. But in service design and in the public sector, all you're trying to do is to make things much easier for people to do the right thing and very, very difficult to do the wrong thing, in terms of filling in forms online or going to your local office, or understanding infection control and how to clean their hands, etc., etc. So I don't see a difference in the design process. The outputs and the outcomes are very different.
I'm disappointed. I thought that they just cooked bread all of the time. Now you're telling me that there's some manipulation in there. I'm really disappointed now. That's really just changed my whole shopping, process now.
There is a whole industry about aromas that create aromas, chemicals that are pushed out there, and of course other retailers in this country. I don't know people from the UK, if you've walked past a Lush, which you can smell from about 3 streets away, these things are not accidental. But there is a positive application of that type of work in dementia care homes, where people tend to lose their appetite because their circadian rhythm has been broken. You can use smells to encourage appetite. So if you smell orange juice and toast first thing in the morning, you are more likely to be hungry for breakfast. And if you smell other smells at lunchtime and dinner, and I'm not talking about the smell of boiling cabbage, I'm talking about pleasant smells of cooking, then it does stimulate appetite. So you can, set off scents at certain times of the day to help people. So all those horrible, nasty, negative things that you might say are in the private sector to help you spend more can be used positively, in other sectors.
Yeah, look, it's fascinating, because as soon as you started talking about dementia care facilities and circadian rhythms, and also listening to the people, it says to me that you're actually quite unique. You don't see your. I mean, what is a designer? A designer needs to actually have content and an understanding of the human being to then create the environment for them to be happy and healthy and well. Would that be a reasonable?
Well, I wouldn't like to think that I'm unique. I'd like to think that almost all designers share that desire to fully understand and work with their user groups or their customer groups. It's all about where you choose to apply that knowledge and those skills. So that, the design process is this kind of mix of understanding your user well enough that you can develop some level of empathy. And in some industries, that is easier than other industries. And then also involving the users, the selection of users and user groups in the design process to make sure that what you are doing is appropriate. And I'd like to think that is now a very recognized either skill set or things what one must develop and learn in order to design well.
So let's now sort of leap into your job at the Design Aging Institute. And I was really struck at the timeliness of this institute. It's been up and running for now just 2 years. Why now? What was the drive now?
Well, I think probably came from the government's grand challenges. A few years ago, they launched sort of kind of 4 or 5 grand challenges, which healthy aging was one, and that provided the stimulus for grant money and for people to focus on this area. But before that, I think what drove that is this knowledge that the world is changing. Populations all over the planet are aging. There is also, in a lot of Western societies, and in particular the UK, this sort of kind of financial time bubble that is going through generations, that's about to be released onto the market. Our people who are 60, 70 now are much wealthier perhaps than previous generations. They benefited from free healthcare, they benefited from free schooling, they benefited from the housing market, the welfare state. All those things have helped this generation have rather more assets than those before it and those after it. And the idea is, can people use those assets to stay healthier for longer?
Mm.
So
Now,
it's a problem and a solution at once.
yeah, it is. I just want to go to your work around marginalised groups, because I think this is one area that we do very badly in the field of ageing. We talk a lot about social isolation and marginalisation and at-risk groups, older women, you know, older homeless, older refugees, older prisoners. But we really don't, I think we don't dedicate sufficient attention in the development of responses to the issues that they're experiencing. Can you talk a little bit about your work in that area?
It's difficult, but if we talk specifically about aging, you know, we frequently say that age is, you know, the most unfashionable brand of all. You know, there is almost nothing you can put, you know, older beside that makes it better other than wine. I don't know, but it's this thing that, you know, retailers don't really want to talk about it. You know, manufacturers don't really want to talk about it. Marketing departments don't target it. You look around your office, the average office, there's very few people 60 plus or even 55 plus in offices anymore. It tends to be this pervasive negative conversation about deterioration, decline, burden, and nobody seems to talk about, you know, all the experiences and all the wisdom that demographic pulls up. And, you know, so yes, we are going to have the oldest population the world has ever known. We're also going to have the wisest population the world has ever known, because of the same thing. As you age, you do bring on board lots of experiences, and not everybody turns those experiences into wisdom, but most people develop some sort of wisdom. So how do we use both the wisdom and the experiences of an aging population to counteract the other effects? But other marginalized groups are the same. It's unfashionable. It's hard to see the profit in solving these problems. It's not that attractive. In terms of designers, it seems difficult, and it's not flashy. It's, you know, it's not what's on the magazines. It's not what's on the front of Design Week and Create a Review. So it tends to get ignored.
So one of the questions that I asked when we talked a few weeks ago was, you know, what do you really do, Colum? And I think you said something about I shout a lot.
Do a lot of shouting.
Yeah. And so what are you shouting about at the Design Aging Institute? What do you actually do there, and what do you hope to be able to achieve?
So I'd say the main aspect of what we do is you know, the word design is important to us. There's other organizations out there doing great work in advocacy and other areas of research, but, you know, design is at the core of what we do. And one of the programs we've got called our Pathfinder programs is about literally providing funding for startups and entrepreneurs and innovators to use design. So, you know, for those who get on the program, we will fund the design phase of their projects to help them get their ideas to market. And we have a collection of very experienced design managers. And that's part of what the Research England grant that set us up is there to provide. And everything kind of feeds into that. So the research that we do is there to inform the designers and the design process, and the impact and the community building stuff that we do is also to communicate the importance of positive aging and how design can play a role. What makes me popular in my role, and maybe very popular in the NHS, is that we don't look at staff or people and blame them. You know, it's not about nurses not washing their hands. It's not about older people not taking responsibility. It is about a system that has got wrong. The system is broken. Humans are only one element in that system, and in reality, damn hard to change them at any age. So it's about looking at every other element of that system: the physical environment, the services provided, the branding, the messaging, ageism, looking at all those other elements and saying, how can design have a role in making those better? And then people will want to make different choices, we hope.
Yeah, well, that's one way to be popular, not blame the person, but actually really focus on a system, which is exactly right. So I want to just, I'm sorry, I've got puppies here, so if you can hear them, I apologize for that. So Colum, I want you to just talk about, you know, the partners that you've got, because I think that the partnership model says something about models for the future to influence policy. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Institute was set up with 5 partners, of which the Royal College of Art is the lead partner, but our other partners are the Oxford University's Institute of Population Aging. And they are doing a lot of heavy lifting on the research side of things to try to understand fully the demographics of an aging society, the marketplace, what's out there, what organizations are working in this space, what the future might look like. And just fully understand how things will change and what the impacts might be at a kind of macro level. And that is very useful for us to know where the market is going to be. One of our other partners is Newcastle's National Innovation Centre for Aging, and we work with them on specific projects, innovation projects, where we provide kind of the design element. We have a designer in residence up there, and they're looking at a couple of projects at the minute. The kind of cargo bot, sort of automated 2-wheeled little robot that follows you about carrying your shopping or whatever it is you want. And then this idea of inclusive banking, looking at digital financial products and services, which are becoming impenetrable for certain members of society who are not that technically literate or digitally literate.
Yeah, go on, Colum.
I would just say then, the International Longevity Centre, who do a lot of the softer types of research, we're looking at spending patterns and spending behaviour as you age and why do they change and what can we do about it. And then the Design Museum, who we do a lot of promotional work through both exhibitions, conferences and talks. So,
I was listening to Australian radio the other day, and the innovation of drones taking shopping, not dropping, but, the shopping. And I wonder whether that is, something that's scalable. How far are we going to go down this automation? What's the balance between, touch and technology? How are we going to manage that in the future?
There's the hoped for answer, and then there's the real answer. Which one do you want?
I think the real today. It's Friday. Let's go for the real.
Yeah, the real answer is, as with banking and as with shopping and as with most things, very shortly there will be a digital only interface. This idea that we're ever going to go back to having high street banks that you walk into and sit with somebody and ask advice, I don't think that's ever coming back, and I don't think we would be prepared to pay for it. And there's definitely a percentage of society that does not work for. And it's not just older people, people who are homeless or otherwise marginalized in society might not be able to access banking that way. But the truth is that the economies of scale, that banks are not government, they are private organizations that seek profits. And we embrace that as a country. And therefore, they are going to go for the route that is going to deliver them the biggest return on investment. And drones, if they ever start to become more affordable than one person driving a van around the busy streets of London, then drones will become a thing for delivering shopping. Of course it will. So what we've got to work out a way of is making the technology disappear so that you're just left with the service that you want. So that people don't complain about, I don't understand how to do on my phone because I don't understand technology. Well, the technology should be invisible, and we are getting closer to that. We still have a long way to go, but we are getting closer to it.
That's really interesting, because the argument in this conversation I was listening to was that this is actually going to be better for traffic, better for fossil fuels, so it was really talking about drones as an enabler to create a more clean environment. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions that have been popped in the chat box. So Danielle Goodman, her statement is, the digital divide is real. Who is working on innovation outside of the digital sphere? And what's the relevance in today's society? That's my bit of the question.
So the digital divide is real. Who's working outside of the digital divide, or who's working on the digital divide?
Yeah, who's outside? Well, Danielle, why don't you come forward and ask Colum the question?
Good morning, Colum. Good morning, everyone. I'm coming to you from Jamaica, where very interested in the questions of how we address design for aging in countries and spheres outside of the industrial West. and using techniques, materials, and approaches that are appropriate for us.
Thanks very much, Danielle. Colum, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we often forget, and I suppose based in London and based in England, we have a very singular internal view of what we're meant to be doing. But there are certain communities in the UK that are also rather remote from London. If you go to Cornwall or certain parts of the world, they are not a 10 million person metropolis, and they struggle with things as well. And Design for Aging has the same role to play. The one benefit of digital technology is that it is kind of universal. If you solve it, it goes global very, very quickly, or can do. But who's working on it? Well, I think most people are working on better digital products and services. I certainly had some time working with the outcomes that were produced by the Government Digital Service, or .gov, I think they now refer to themselves as. And they are doing exemplary work on redesigning digital interfaces. But there are a lot of digital interfaces, and not all organizations are spending the same time and effort getting them right. And this is where the idea of inclusive design comes in, that they've got to be designed inclusively, not for the average 35-year-old person with average ability and average privilege. They've got to be designed much more inclusively, so they include the margins of society as well, because otherwise we will end up with this two-speed society where people are left out, which is, I think, is unacceptable. And I'm afraid our politics, our government, are rather slow to respond to these changes, which is why we're trying to lobby them to try to force some legislation to force products and services, particularly in this case, packaging, to be designed inclusively. We've been banging on for about 30 years for packaging design to be more inclusive, so that anybody can open it, not just somebody with medium strength. And it just hasn't happened because, retailers, manufacturers, they follow the market economy and they design around their needs and they try to reduce prices for the consumer. But what it does is it marginalizes people with lower abilities. And we've asked politely, we've shouted quite loudly, and now I think, we're trying to lobby Parliament and say, right, now is the time to introduce minimum inclusive design standards similar to those that exist for public buildings. If anybody in the UK will be familiar with Part M of the building regulations that dictate how you must design buildings so they are accessible and inclusive. Well, why is the Disability Discrimination Act just focused on buildings? Why is it not focused on everything? And so that's a question we want to ask.
So I think that your strategy is polite, shout, and then advocate. So I want to know the next one after that. There's a couple of questions I'd like to ask people to come forward with, and Brenda Sherlock will be the first, and then Peter Whitehouse. So Brenda, would you like to come forward and ask Colum your question?
Sorry, I'll just have to go back to my question because I've lost it.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, that's okay. I have it.
Okay.
Yeah. Joined up thinking, especially in government, like you're promised everything, but what you get is maybe totally different to what is needed. And just a question for Colum. Design, I would think, is what was designed years ago as against today, because you can't just design something now this minute and have it, say, in production. I'm thinking, say, specifically about cars. Today's car was designed maybe, what, 10, 15 years ago? So that's just a question to Colum. Okay. But the other thing is about the marginalized. How often are the marginalized included in what they need as against what is perceived as what they need? Thank you.
Great question. Thanks, Colum.
Yeah, lots of questions there. Brendan, thank you for that. I'll go around them shortly. So when I was with the NHS, this was one of the problems, big problem with non-joined up thinking and different parts of public service and civil service and government not working together hand in glove. And as you say, it takes 10 to 15 years to build a hospital from the minute somebody says, I think we need a hospital, to actually opening the door. And even if we decided the best thing to do is have 320 new hospitals in the UK, it is going to take 50 years before that would happen. And we couldn't afford it anyway. So you frequently have to work with almost broken parts of the system and to make them work somehow. And of course, we all know lots of the answers to the care issues that people keep talking about is about preventative health. But the people who pay for, preventative health care for behavior change aren't the ones that benefit from it. The ones that benefit from it are acute hospitals through reduced A&E admissions. But those two things are not joined up. I'm glad to say where I'm from in Belfast in Northern Ireland, they do have a integrated health and social care system. And so those systems are joined up and they are starting to work better. And as a test case, it's really interesting to watch how that is working and how much emphasis is put on carers and helping carers to keep people out of acute care and away from care homes. But it's very interesting. And you talked about who asks people what they need. Well, a good design process would. But if you're designing for 2 million people, you clearly can't involve 2 million people in a singular design process. So it is always going to be representative and always therefore a little blunt. But you should always involve users and develop that empathy. But you talked a lot about needs, and I have a kind of war on needs. And we hear in the care and healthcare this idea a needs assessment. If anybody come across that term where you have your needs assessment done, and it's like, and then somebody comes in and decides on your needs, writes a list of your needs assessment. Says, I'm not interested in needs. I want a wants assessment. I want you to ask me what I want. And from that, hopefully your needs will come and be solved. But don't bring things that I need, that I hate, and I don't want, because I just won't use them. Ask me what I want. And so we talk about that's what design does. It focuses on what people want, what motivates them, what they're interested in. And yes, of course, it's got to deliver on what they need. But need is only one part of a 3-phase process.
Okay, we've got loads of questions, so I'm going to sort of give you a couple, Colum. So Peter Whitehouse and then U3A. So Peter, welcome.
Nice to be with you, Jane, and thank you, Colin. You began to answer my question by talking about the NHS and design of hospitals, but I guess I would ask you to generalize. I think the meme design is critical in the world. Well, how do you think about designing organizational structures and process in general? Do you think biomimicry is a useful way of thinking about how we human beings should create organizations like hospitals and healthcare systems that actually keep us healthier? Thank you.
Yeah, I think you better take that one because the next question is in a different direction. So take that one.
Yeah, well, thanks, Peter. It is a little bit outside my expertise, organization design. I have studied it, never practiced it, never been asked to design an organization. But organizations are part of the system, and I'm designing so that they're all fluid, because it is kind of like an organism. Healthcare generically is like a living organism, and it changes quickly and grows and moves. So yes, it absolutely has to be designed, and it is not seen as a design challenge, and therefore the design process that is user-centered is not often used, and you end up getting systems forced on people that because, and then people reject them because they weren't involved, they weren't asked, and it becomes more difficult. But I wouldn't claim to have any expertise in organization design, other than to say, yes, it's still a design problem and shouldn't be any different.
So Colin, a question from Shmuel. How does remote technologies revolution caused in result of the COVID pandemic can support design and planning? So the remote technologies that were used in the pandemic, are they translatable, or are there lessons learnt in the pandemic that can support better planning for the future?
Yes, I mean, I always feel a bit of a fraud saying that, I was head of design of the Ministry of Justice, because I was. But during the pandemic, I got COVID very early on, February, whatever it was, right at the beginning, and recovered quite easily. But then asked to go to the front line to do something useful, because I was now immune for 6 or 9 months at that stage. And I was sent back to the NHS from the ministry to work with NHSX, getting tablet computers into every care home in the country, so that families could talk to the residents of the care home, and healthcare staff could have consultations without the need to visit. And of course, what we learned very quickly was that we always said, yeah, by 2030 or 2040, 97% of older people will be online. Well, it happened. It happened in 6 months. So that almost everybody now has the ability to go online and has use some sort of video conferencing with their families and friends. And that really accelerated the adoption in technology and otherwise hard to reach groups. And I think that's going to have an immense positive benefit going forward, because social isolation is a big thing and some of it is very hard to solve, but can be solved in part by being able to have conversations like this. And while sitting here chatting to you is not the same as having a hug or somebody bringing me a cup of tea. It is better than sitting and looking out the window and wondering what I'm going to do with my life. So I think the pandemic accelerated some things that we hope to see the benefit of going forward, but it also, we all had a kind of 1 year stop where we all thought, am I happy? And we all kind of reprioritize things a bit in our lives to some degree. And am I happy spending 2 hours on London Underground every day and going to an office every day and maybe not feeling as if I'm, self-worth taking a hit and not spending enough time with my family? And most of us said, no, I want that balance to change. And I think these are positive things, actually.
Look, they're very positive. And just for the record, it was the first time in 18 years that my husband and I had spent 24/7 together, and we survived. So COVID was a good thing, all right, from that perspective. I'd like to now go to U3A. I'm not sure who that is. And
It's Eileen here, Jane.
Hello, Eileen.
Hello, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Colum, for an excellent conversation. My question is, you mentioned two things. One at the beginning, that you provide funding for projects, and then you went on and mentioned that finance and banking is here going forward technology-wise. They're ignoring, it's the balance between high touch and high tech. They've completely, some of them want to completely ignore the high touch balance. But when you're funding, do you put in a criteria for the design of either a product or a service to avoid digital ageism and digital bias? For instance, some of the algorithms and questionnaires designed by financial institutions there's obviously digital ageism. So, and other biases. Do you put that in your funding criteria?
Thanks, Simon. Good to have you with us.
Yeah, and I should say that it is U3A in England that we're working with on the University of the Third Age on our packaging campaign with government, and they've been very, very helpful in our support. But to answer your question, it's not that we try not to, but we want to get a balance of products and services not digital. I mean, if it would be easy when you put out a call and say we're looking for products and services, the amount that we get back where the answer is I've got an app for that. Loneliness, great, I've got an app for that. It's a sort of older people dating site, and the amount of those things that we see, it shows you where the market is going. And we don't ignore digital, because it's definitely part of a package of solutions. But we're working on walkers and live work spaces in retirement homes and that sort of stuff as well. Physical products, services, and interiors. But when we do have digital products, so we did one hearing birdsong, which I know you might want to hear about. We do try to create the interfaces so there is no technology. If anybody says to you the interface is really simply just go to the drop-down menu, right? Stop, forget it, gone already. How would anybody know what a drop-down menu was unless they're my age or younger? So all those terminologies, they've just got to disappear.
Yeah, before we go and ask David to come forward with his question, as I said, I was up at 5 in the morning this morning reading about hearing birdsong. And I really want you to share this innovation, because I think it's just incredible and remarkable. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so hearing birdsong is from a company called Kennedy Woods, who one of our first round Pathfinders who came on the program. And they had on the back of some earlier funding that developed this way of redoing the common hearing test. So what was discovered is a lot of people lose their hearing as they age, or don't lose, it sort of diminishes in a certain way where you find it harder to hear, and in busy situations trying to sort of work out who's saying what, where it's coming from, and filter out noise from the person as it gets more and more difficult. But people ignored and ignored and ignored. And poor hearing is linked to dementia and social isolation and all sorts of things. So they developed this technology where they took sort of 5 or 6 common English birds and changed slightly the sound so they were all on very specific frequencies, and then play it to people. So fundamentally, if you go through this app or this website, which is in beta testing at the minute, and you can't hear the lark, then maybe you should go and see your doctor. So it's just a very simple way. Anybody now can go online. I think if you go on the Hearing Bird Song, there is a beta that you can go on and just listen to. And all it is taking a walk through the park digitally, and there are rainscapes and soundscapes, and it asks you, can you hear a bird? You know, what can you hear? And then it'll say, well, that was a lark. And if you couldn't hear it immediately, then you might have a problem. If you couldn't hear it at all, then you probably do have a problem. But it's something to do at home really, really quickly. And it's that sort of easy, accessible, something you might want to do and quite enjoy doing, rather than going to see your GP, trying to get an appointment with a hearing specialist, going to see the hearing specialist, having one of those beep tests. It's all very clinical, it's all very frightening, and most of us won't have a problem. So this is just a way to really signify, to let you know there might be a problem, but it is a digital interface. But we've tried to do it as simple as possible, and we don't ask questions that we don't need the answer to. And that's the big thing from GDS. Never ask a question that you don't need the answer to. You know, every question you ask is, you know, in response to the previous question, every question that you ask is an opportunity for somebody to drop off and give up. And if you've asked, you know, so never ask a question you don't actually need the answer to progress. And you know, that is you know, GDS and government perfect yet. There's millions of these sites, so not perfect yet. But unfortunately, a lot of people in the private sector aren't following those guidelines just yet. And as I've forgotten the name, but the question's right. There is bias. There's bias in us all. And sometimes you have to say, right, it's unconscious bias. It's bias that I can't help. I was born and grew up in Belfast. I have a very particular view of the troubles that I grew up in, and that's a bias, and that's fine as long as it doesn't come out in prejudice, which, you know, with a lot of banking companies and a lot of other companies, it can come out in prejudice, and that's what's got to be guarded against. But but getting deep into the algorithms of the banking world, we haven't got that far yet.
I'm just intrigued as to this bird song, because really we're kind of normalizing the process of, you know, having your hearing tested, you know, in a broad perspective. And I'd be much happier, you know, having that than going to a GP and going to an audiologist, and because there is a fear and anxiety that there's something wrong. Yeah. So we're going to go and ask David Richardson. You've got a couple of questions for Colum, so the floor is yours, David.
Well, thank you. The second question I'll ask first, and it has, we hear a lot about different jurisdictions wanting to digitize more services for reasons of efficiency and convenience and so on. At the same time, there's a lot of dialogue about the digital divide, and that some aspects or some sectors in the community may be left behind in this race to digitize. And I don't see, on the part of the large companies involved in tech, I don't see a very strong appetite for creating more user-friendly products or more fail-proof products. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how much, whether some of this sort of dilemma we find ourselves in is a market failure because the companies really are not engaged in the idea of user-friendly technology to the extent that will be necessary, particularly to help older adults. So I wonder if there's a market failure there that needs some intervention by government or academic institutions or nonprofit organizations or what have you. And if you want, I'll ask my second question, which has partially been answered, and that is, to what emphasis is placed on consultation with older adults in the work of age design? you mentioned that there's a limit to how much consultation can be done. But I'm wondering sort of if you could expand upon that a little bit.
So the first question is, we live in a market economy in this country, not a command economy, and the market will follow the money, and that is what it does. It is very good at it. It was set up to do that. Unfortunately, what that does is it does follow the money, and people on the margins get left out. And that is why you need legislation. If it was up to the building industry, I don't think we'd see many ramps and handrails outside buildings. So I think we do. There is a time and a place for legislation to enforce minimum standards for certain things, so people don't get isolated and marginalized. But we will have to accept that this digital world is not going to change. Well, but what has to change is the quality, and the tests for design have to get better. I usually use the analogy of a car. But when I was a kid growing up, if you wanted to drive a car, you kind of had to be a semi-mechanic. You had to know, you didn't just get in and push a button and it started. There was choke out, choke in, choke half out, tap the accelerator twice, put the clutch in, then try to start it. If you didn't do that, my Citroen 2CV would not start. It would flood, and then you'd be 20 minutes later. These days, you open a bonnet of a car and it says, do not touch. There are now machines that kind of don't need any of that. And if it's not working, it's proper broken, leave it alone, go and get somebody specialist. Digital technology is nowhere near that yet. It is better, but it breaks all the time. And, that turn it off, turn it on again. Well, why? It's clearly bust. Surely we have to get somewhere where you do not need any technical expertise to use these things. And that's what we'd be striving for with our digital products, that there's no expertise needed. It is inclusive to all. And only then, will we have achieved a true sort of digitally inclusive society. But it's tough because, the market economy goes one way. But I heard an expression when I was working for Sainsbury's, and it was, customers vote with their wallets. And I would suggest to anybody, if you don't like your bank, if it's not responding to your needs, leave, because it's the only power you've got. And there are better banks out there. I'm personally a big fan of Monzo. I don't know whether that's, how universal Monzo is, not because it's cool and funky, although I quite like that too, but just because the interface is so easy. The way you can turn off and on your card and off and on your PIN and freeze things and unfreeze things and see spending in real time as it happens, challenge things as they happen. I just think it is a much more user-friendly, intuitive interface than my other bank. So yeah, the only way the market economy is going to move is either through legislation or people voting with their custom. And so I'd encourage people to do that. Your second question, I have already forgotten. So what was, sorry, David, what was your second?
I just wondered what emphasis is placed on consultation with users. I heard an interesting story, if I could tell you very briefly, I think on a similar seminar to this a little while ago, of a building being built, long-term care, I believe it was, in Japan. And they wanted to include art and so on in the design of the building. And they consulted with the people who are currently resident in that building, including terminally ill people who wouldn't be around to see the results, but they valued their opinion. And I thought that was a really touching sort of example of consultation. And I wondered what sort of emphasis is placed in your institute on consultation with ultimate users of these various buildings or other products.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we bring, and when people coming to work with us are pathfinders, it is almost the one thing they're all desperate for, is access to user groups. It seems to be very difficult. So partly through our partnership with U3A, which is wonderful, and partly through our partnership with the Voice Network in Newcastle, which is a network of older users, and our own network of older users, we consult heavily. The design process is a user-centered process. If you're not involving the users, if you're not co-designing with them, then the chances are whatever you're designing is going to fail, because you're not getting the right insight. the art thing is really interesting. I worked when I was with the NHS with an American professor, I think his name was Roger Ulrich, who was Texas A&M, and he was paid at one point to select artwork for the hospital they were building. I think, I can't remember, it was the Northwest or the Northeast in Chicago. Some benefactor would give them several £1 million to buy art. And what they're discovering is the art that was being picked, all this wonderful modern art, was raising people's blood pressure and heart rates, and was actually killing patients, literally making it more dangerous. So he set about this huge program of bringing art in and measuring people's blood pressure and their heart rate and asking them about it and did they enjoy it. And they realized that art of families, of smiling people, of great landscapes, of cottages with little smoke, things that you might say if you're in the art world were bad art, twee art, actually reduced heart rate and actually speeded recovery. So there is a bit of a science behind, so absolutely involve your users, otherwise you end up killing them, which is not a good thing, I believe.
So Colin, you've really taken me back to when I was 17 years of age, talking about chokes and accelerators and the clutch. So thank you for doing that in that segment. We've really moved on, haven't we? I just want to make a point that Alexandra made very early on, and it was really about we're going to have fewer children, the need to create an environment where older adults still continue to be able to contribute to the economy. It's a major shift that we need. So I'm just we've got one final question and then we're going to start moving to the wrap up. And that's, thank you, Alexandra, for that point, because it really speaks to the demographics and the need for the Design Aging Institute and someone like Colum that shouts. So could I ask Christine Cobus? Christine, would you like to come forward and make your comment and question?
Well, I was just thinking, I thank you very much, everyone, for the contributions, and Colum for recognizing the connection or link between design and involving users in that process. That if a marketer were to adopt the vision of no one left behind, even if it weren't something they could, palatably, sort of grasp immediately, if it were a vision and it were promoted as such, I think that would be very attractive, to people in terms of users of whatever the product, whatever the design that they're working on. So that was my comment.
Yeah, I think that idea of, so there's a slight difference, a subtle difference between inclusive design and accessible design. And it's hard to tread that line. So in theory at the Institute, we're all about inclusive design, which is designed for the widest audience possible without the need for special adaptation. So it's hard to know at what point is a special adaptation special and not just actually quite inclusive. But whereas accessible design is about design for literally everybody. But it's clearly it's a spectrum, and you want to go as far into accessibility as possible, I think. As long as it remains affordable and possible. But I'd like to go back to that comment on work and retirement, which was quite interesting. One of our targets is to help people remain in work. And I think as we go forward, that is going to be both necessary and desirable. The retirement age, I once said, I was pulled up on it immediately, that all these numbers, 50 plus, third agers, 50 plus or 55 plus, or everybody over 60, or everybody in retirement, all these vague numbers are all just made up and meaningless. And a professor at Oxford pulled me up and said they're not meaningless. The retirement age was done with great science by us many years ago to set the retirement age based on what the average man could reasonably be expected to still do, working man, still do at what age, and at what age are they no longer capable of maybe lugging bricks or digging holes. And so there was a lot of science behind that age of 65, which was the old retirement age. But as medicine improves, as healthcare improves, as our understanding of well-being improves, the age of 65, which in this country is now 67, is going to go up and up and up. Average life expectancy is going up and is set to accelerate. It's not going to plateau as far as we're told by researchers. It will accelerate, not plateau. So we're all going to have to work longer, either because we have to or because we want to. And I think those are two very interesting things, that some people some people want to work much longer than 67 if the work is rewarding and fulfilling and adds value to your life, brings social interaction, brings relationships, brings a sense of purpose. And some people will just have to, because whatever pension they've got is not adequate for the lifestyle that they want or need. But we're not thinking about that. We look at retirement villages, we look at supported living accommodation. The one thing that's missing is there's no live workspaces. In this new age of working from home, live workspaces aren't being designed into these villages. And so this is one of the projects we're looking at the minute with Northumbria University, and I think it's Pentagram is the design company. What would a live workspace look like in a retirement community?
Look, Colin, I think you probably haven't seen the chat box, but people are just fascinated with this conversation. But we've actually got to come to a close now. So I'm going to leave you for a couple of minutes, and I'm going to introduce next week's speaker, and then I'm going to come back to you, make some closing remarks, and then hand the floor to you to give us your takeaway messages. So just hang there for us. You know, next week, I will have the greatest of pleasures in moderating, you know, in conversation with Professor Alex Mihailidis. Now, Alex and I go back many, many years in terms of our work in the field of aging. And over the course of Alex's career, you know, he has become known as a world leader in innovation. But not only that, he has real life experiences that brings to, you know, his work a deep sense of respect for the human being and the frailty and fragility of life. So join with us next week. You know, Alex, as with me, is one of those 50 people that have been recognised for our contribution in the field of healthy ageing. And across the next 12 months, we're going to interview and be in conversation with as many as we can. So join with me next week to be in conversation with Professor Alex Mihailidis. So, Colum, I just want to make a few remarks. First and foremost, I want to be on your team. You know, this has been one of the most interesting, fascinating conversations that I've had for such a long time. Some of the things that really caught my mind were, we don't need a need assessment. We should be having a wants assessment. You know, polite shout advocacy legislation. Healthcare is a living system, and we fail to realise that. We kind of see healthcare as this structure, when in fact it's dynamic. I was fascinated that, you know, Colum, I'm sorry that you got COVID early on, but called to the front line. Wow, we needed someone like you and your colleagues to be at the front line. And I was really struck by the fact that, you know, that iPads, you know, don't substitute for touch, for being together, but they're better than sitting in front of the window, or not even having a window to look out of, you know, just sitting. Technology will always be with us, but the quality needs to change. And I'll always take away the clutch, you know, the choke and the accelerator. Voting with our wallets, which means make choice because there are other opportunities. And I think finally, the bird song for me, you know, is such a highlight. But it's been an absolute pleasure. You're just a unique human being that brings to the place, you know, the humanness of design and the connections with aging. So could I ask you to actually give us your takeaway messages for this audience today?
I will do, but first I want to say thank you, Jane, to yourself and your organisation and everybody on this talk today. It's been I found it exciting and interesting as well. I maybe said some things I wasn't expecting to say, so that's always quite exciting. My takeaway message is what it kind of always is, which is on this whole planet of ours, everything can be categorized into two boxes. Things designed by Mother Nature and things designed by people. You know, everything made by people has been designed. And you've got a simple choice: design it well or design it badly. And I don't understand why so much of it is designed badly. So that's my message: is look at everything around you and just think of it other than a tree and grass, and think of it as a design challenge. Why has it not been well designed? And do not use the lazy excuse that, oh, it's a wicked problem. I hate that expression. It's not a wicked problem. It's just difficult. No, do it. Just take it on and do it well, or as well as you can.
Well, Colum, all of us are going to join your team, and thank you for the special honour of being part of our conversation this morning at our Global Cafe. In closing, thanks to Colum, but also thank to all of you that are coming from many parts of the world today, even some Australian friends and colleagues and family, so thank you. Also to the IFA team. I have the great honour and pleasure to work with some amazing human beings at the IFA. So I thank you all, and in particular, Luana and Bruna. Bruna for your leadership, and Luana for being part of the leadership team in these important global cafes. So be safe, be happy, and if you can't be happy, just come back next week and you'll get your dose of coffee and conversations next week. So all the best. Thanks, Colin. Good night.